Hi. I'm gonna go off on a little bit of a rabbit hole journey, so bear with me. Um, what I like to do is I like to sometimes go off the cuff and start researching something that becomes very popular, and it gets popularized as a solution, a quick fix, and kind of an easy band-aid that the government pulls off. And but it has long-term ramifications, it has long-term consequences. And one of those long term consequences that's very popular, unfortunately, to say, and people are very like gung ho about it because they hear a buzzword, let's say free, when really free means tax funded, and let's say affordable. And I'd like to call that affordable isn't necessarily affordable for everybody. It comes at a price for some people, aka the taxpayer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Um, what I like to talk about is something called affordable housing. And what kind of goes hand in hand with it is also rent control. So I will briefly touch on rent control. So rent control is something that's artificially fueled for the most part, where there will be an imposing of you can't raise the rent past this price. It is very, it's altruistic. And when you hear the buzzword low, affordable, like it triggers something in the back my mind, it triggers it too, is it's a good thing. It's a good thing. But unfortunately, that is not always the case in terms of the market. Because in the long term, it's necessarily not a good thing. And I'm going to get into that. When prices are really low, people who normally wouldn't look for an apartment, like those who are willing to stay at a parent's house for a little bit longer, or who are looking like with roommates, or even just can afford to buy that place and to keep it and not necessarily live there full time. Like that's the secondary home, or that's like the kind of the place you go in and you stay for a little bit for a vacation, and you do that regularly, but you don't live there. That's not your primary residence. It kind of affords all of those things when rent is artificially low for apartments, for properties. And it prices out the people who are really sincerely looking for a home. Hi. So, what I meant to say was that those home buyers who are saving and saving for a house, and when housing prices are so low, they're not priced out of the market. What happens is that a housing shortage forms. Now, of course, this is a very simplistic viewing of rent control. But unfortunately, it has been proven in the past, time and time again. I'm going to do kind of a historical thing where it's like after World War II, rent control ended, the housing shortage disappeared. It's because all of those people that were like, oh, rent is low. Let's go find a place. That couldn't necessarily wait to find a place were like able to wait. And those who really, really needed a home and were looking and diligent in affording one and were able to save up, that's they went and bought a home and found a home. So that's a very simplistic view of rent control. But I just wanted to kind of breeze through that because rent control, like affordable housing, which I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into, has been used to trick the consumer in thinking that this short-term solution is a solution, when really it's just a band-aid for a bullet wound for a bigger problem, a bigger issue. Now, affordable housing programs tend to be taxpayer funded, to say the least. Bonds. Affordable housing programs are often funded by bonds, by grants, by below market rentals, by home buyer assistance, aka bonds, supportive housing and preservation. And they target people who can't necessarily afford the market price. The reason that it kind of, and this is my personal opinion, the reason I believe that it taxes those who can't afford a market price, it creates a reliance on the government for these incentive assistant programs. And unfortunately, it relies on heavy taxes, borrowing, public administration. So it kind of lends into, if I can't do it, then, oh, I can just apply for this and it'll be it'll be good, it'll be golden. I don't have to save up to work hard for this. Now, I'm not saying that the saving up is necessarily working in our current economy, because of course that isn't true. There are a lot of problems that can't afford the saving to be part of the program to buy your home. There's a lot of different things that go into it. So I'm going to go over some programs that have been called quote unquote successful in terms of affordable housing. I'm going to start with public and nonprofit social housing. And the example I'm going to use is in Vienna, Austria. And basically how it works is that the city provides the land, okay, financing and support for municipally owned and limited profit housing. Now, about 60% of residents live in municipally owned or public supported housing. It's been considered a success, and they say why it helps is because it's large, it's sustained its supply, and it helps keep rent less exposed to a speculative market pressure. So you're kind of forcing the market to bow down to your will, and there's always going to be consequences to that. So here are the barriers to that, because I had to dig a little bit deeper and be like, I know there are cons to this. Can we just go with it? Okay, so cons is that there are waiting lists. Okay. Research shows that significant waits, while critics cite roughly 21,000 households on subsidized housing are on a waiting list. So the waiting list is huge for these subsidized housings, naturally so. The entry requirements that you must be a primary resident in Vienna for at least 2 years. And it can exclude new arrivals, migrants, students, or people relocating to work. So that can obviously be an issue. There's an upfront payment. So one of the barriers is that there's a one limited profit cooperative units, and they require a construction contribution or a move-in payment. So, quote unquote, you still need to put a down payment, you can say, on these properties, even though you necessarily don't own this property. I don't know if you get that back. Another one is that there's an insider advantage. So we're human. There are moments where we're not going to do the altruistic thing. And so the tendency is that they pass the residents to family members, and that protects existing tenants, but doesn't necessarily reduce turnover and give new people residencies. It kind of rewards those who are already in the system. And then, of course, don't forget your bureaucratic management in this. So there's a lot of critics who argue the full cost is hard to measure because of financial performance and indirect public support, and they're not always transparent. Surprise, surprise. And the private market pressure remains the same. Like, it doesn't just disappear because you've willed it to disappear. About 80% of Vienna residents are renters, and only roughly 60% live in municipal or subsidized housing. Those outside of the protected sector are more exposed to rising private rents. So because you're not in the subsidized housing, unfortunately, you are going to be exposed to higher rent prices outside of that. So those are the downsides of public and nonprofit social housing. So if you hear the words public and nonprofit social housing, run the other direction and say all of the cons that happen with Vienna, because it doesn't fix this. It doesn't fix the city solution. It actually creates more problems. Next up is government-built home ownership. So as soon as I say the title, I feel like there should already be an issue. It's like government-built home ownership. Just saying. We're still in the United States of America. Come on. So this is through Singapore Housing and Development Board. And so the government develops apartments and sells long leasehold homes. And they often, with subsidized financing, aka probably taxpayer funded, the public retains the underlying land. I find that very suspicious. The public retains underlying land. I don't buy that for 1 second. I feel like the government retains that, but I'm going to keep going. It makes ownership more attainable while keeping land costs from being fully passed into the initial price. Okay, Singapore, let's see what's going on. Here are the cons for that. There's limited ownership rights. Surprise, surprise. There's a lease decay. So what I mean is that older housing developments, flats with fewer years, are remaining can be harder to sell, finance, or use for retirement wealth. In terms when you buy a house, it's included in an investment and you build up equity and you can borrow against it. Like there are all different kinds of things you can do with your home because technically it's yours. You necessarily can't do that with a government built ownership because it gets harder to finance it, to sell it, or to even borrow money against it. So I am not an expert when it comes to retirement, so take that with a grain of salt. All right. Next up, price and resale pressure problems. So there's a lot of, with the new build to order flats, which they call apartments, they receive subsidies, but the resale of that property prices can rise sharply. So the resale prices rose nearly 10% in 2024, and some flats have exceeded $1 million, which I feel like that completely defeats the purpose of the reason for the government built home ownership. Like I feel like the market's going to win either way. And then of course, the long waits for a new home. Like, if it's government built and it's government owned, there's going to be a wait list to this. So, the build to order system generally starts construction after buyers commit. So, which can mean that the waits for these are about 3 to 5 years. So, you're on a list, you buy, and then you have to wait 3 to 5 years for it to be built. Cool plan, you guys. And then that pushes families needing housing now into a higher priced resale market or rental housing. So you're pushing families either way into a higher market than you intended it to be. So that is government built homeownership. And obviously there's going to be bureaucratic mess with the long waiting game for that. Next up is community land trusts. So this is actually in Vermont. So this is a Chapeland Housing Trust in Vermont. Okay. Isn't Bernie Sanders? I want to say that Bernie Sanders is the representative for Vermont, and that would make a lot of sense for this. Okay, so Bernie Sanders is a representative of Vermont. He's one of their state senators, so that makes a lot of sense. So, how it works is that a nonprofit owns the land permanently. Wow. Okay, it's disturbing, and then residents buy or rent the home under a long-term affordability rules. The trust is the largest U.S. CLT with roughly 565 ownership homes and more than 2,200 rental homes. So the resale formula keeps homes affordable for the next buyer, not just for the first, so it claims. Here are the barriers, the cons. There's limited appreciation. So homeowners usually cannot keep the full market price gain when selling. A resale formula caps the price so that the next buyer can afford the home. So when the homeowner put a lot of time and effort into this home and the resale price is actually valued at a higher price, they can't go to that higher price or make that profit because the whole point is to make it affordable for the next. So that seller is losing out on a great profit, and I feel like there's no incentive to resell that property at that point. You do not own the land. The trust holds the land. That's like I say. There are restrictions on the use of the land. So obviously, the land leases typically require owner occupancy, and they limit renting out the home. So subletting, major modifications, or using the property as an investment. So in other words, here, buy your property from this nonprofit. Okay, I bought the house. Great. Here are a couple limits. There's a cap on owner occupancy. You can't have too many people in the home. Okay, cool. You can't rent out the home. You can't sublet. You can't make additional income off of your home. Forget about redoing the backyard. Forget about redoing the kitchen. You can't do any major modifications to the home. But I'm paying for the home. Not necessarily. We just own a home on our land. Okay. And you can't list this property as an investment. It's not an investment. It's just your home. Financing can be harder. So lenders and appraisers must understand the ground lease and resale formula. So established CLTs often work with lenders. Uncommon terms can narrow financing options or complicate refinancing. So if you're looking for financial options into financing for this home or refinancing for this home, your options are very narrowed given the given the ground lease and that there's a specific resale formula to it. Because remember, in the first point, you can't have the market price exceed the cap that it would be that would be unaffordable for another person to buy. And then, of course, the quirk of it all, there's a continued reliance on subsidies. So surprise, surprise, the model commonly requires initial grants, public land donations, or subsidized financing to acquire the land and construct homes. Low ground lease fees usually cannot pay all the operating costs. So basically, there's this constant reliance on subsidized financing over and over again. You don't wean yourself off of that necessarily. Okay, next up is mixed income development. Now, this one has been a little bit controversial. It's a cross-subsidized public development. It's a project that includes market rate units whose rent revenue supports income-restricted homes, and some public development models require at least 20% of rentals for households at or below 50% of area median income, which means that in the housing development, you would set aside some units for those who are 50% below the median income. So while the rest of the people in the unit are paying, no, arguably they would be paying higher rent than you because they're not the 50% of the area of median income. So you would be paying a lower rent than the rest of the people in the, which is unfair. Let's call it. So there's a mix of incomes and it reduces the amount of subsidy required for the affordable units. However, it creates a lot of animosity because it creates an imbalance and it's not right. There's also other factors that go into it of cons. So it's more difficult for financing again. So the developer must balance the market rate revenues and the below market rents and tax credits or subsidies and lender requirements. And they have different unit roles. So they have to balance they need to keep these units affordable, but at the same time, if the market is saying for whatever reason, you need to kind of hike up these prices to make up for the gap, there is going to be animosity in that. And it's like, why would you move into that? Why would you move into that residence? And then there's a dependence on market demand. So the market rate portion must attract enough higher income renters or buyers to support. Again, you are going to need the support of those higher renters. But what is the justification of living in a unit where 20% of those units are to lower subsidized housing? That's not right. All right. Another example is inclusionary zoning. So the developer affordability requirements. So how it works is that cities require or incentivize developers to set aside part of a new housing or lower and middle income households, often in exchange for density or other benefits. So it creates below market homes in areas where a private development is already happening. So the barriers for this is that it can reduce new construction. So because it's a required below the market units, they reduce the expected revenue from it. And if a project no longer meets a lender's and investor's minimum return, it's going to get delayed, moved, or downsized, or even canceled. So that's the downfall of this. Can worsen a general shortage. So if it reduces the total construction, fewer overall homes are available, and that can raise costs for households who don't qualify for the restricted units. And it shifts their public responsibility to small groups. So projects with tight margins, smaller condos, townhomes, modest apartments are more vulnerable than the high-end projects. And it can make it harder to build privately owned starter homes, especially the ones that California needs. So those are all of the examples of quote unquote successful affordable housing programs. And I'm just shaking my head in disagreement because the market always catches up and that totally makes it worse. I suspect what you're saying is, well, how can I afford a home in California if it's not through affordable housing and it's not through subsidized? It's not through a check for the government, and it's not through these ridiculous out-of-the-box notions of these ridiculous wait lists and the bureaucratic mess that comes with affordable housing. What do I do? Well, a solution is to cut down the bureaucratic mess and relay that message to your representatives. So here are a couple examples of market-based cost reductions. You legalize more homes per plot. You allow duplexes, townhomes, small apartments, condos, and smaller lots in high-demand neighborhoods. And more homes split on the cost of land. Here's one way. You replace discretionary approval with clear rules. So if a project meets a published zoning, safety, and design rules and approve it administratively rather than requiring political hearings and negotiated conditions, that can be one way. So you streamline the approval processes with clear rules. All right. People are going to have so much trouble with this. Eliminate parking mandates. So let builders decide how much parking buyers will pay for. Like in transit-rich places, structured parking can make smaller homes or condos financially unworkable. So the minimum parking requirements are among regulations that, they raise development costs. So I would eliminate parking mandates in some areas. I don't necessarily agree with the transient, like putting houses and condos there. But again, that is one solution that could be found. Cut excessive fees and delay costs. Now, the Fund General City Services through general revenue, cut excessive fees and delay costs. When you fund general city services through general revenue, rather than charging a large share to new homes, you can have an impact on the price of the house. So California impact fees average around $23,455 for a single family house and $19,558 per multifamily unit in 2015. It's nearly 3 times the national average. So if you were to fund general city services through a general revenue, you wouldn't have to charge a large share of that to new homes. And that $23,455 might go down to that $19,000. So never know. All right, another one is to permit small lots and compact homes. So to make starter homes practical, it's about like 600 to 1,500 square foot condos, townhomes, courtyard apartments, and small detached homes. And the buyer pays for less land and fewer materials. So in other words, the buyer of that land can turn that land into either condos or townhomes, creating more compact homes in a smaller space. Allowing conversions and infill. So you remove local restrictions that treat factory-built homes differently from site-built homes when they meet the same safety standards. So if these two different homes meet the same safety standards, why are you treating them differently? Standardize the designs, you reduce those delays, and you cut down on those expenses for construction. All right, make environmental review focused and predictable. Okay, so to keep the environmental and safety protections, but prevent duplicate studies. There are duplicate studies. I'm not surprised. An open-ended litigation for projects that already conform to adopted local plans. So there's a common theme here. There's not enough streamlining in terms of reviews of environmental review focused, of conversion infill, of approvals, and that could cut down on a lot of costs. And protect property rights to add housing. Allow homeowners to add an ADU, subdivide a lot, or replace a detached home with several homes without having to obtain neighbors' permission. It's their land. All right. And a lot of those ideas are very controversial, but some of them can be adoptable. Like, for example, the replace discretionary approval with clear rules. That could be easily adoptable. Allow conversions and infill. So in other words, remove the local restrictions. Streamline environmental review focused and make it predictable in terms of that. And that's about it. And then a lot of the other ones are very homeowner based. They They have the homeowner access the right on what to do with their land. If they want to subsidize, if they want to add more lots to create more income, it's better for the market, and it discredits the whole argument of a housing shortage. So it's a better market-oriented solution, and it doesn't replace saving with permanent subsidies. And it makes it possible for the builder, and it offers a wider variety, wider range of privately owned homes. Sure, they may be smaller, but they are homes. And like, it lets private owners build far more homes in their high demand areas. It has the beauty of creating starter homes, starter home types. So that way people in their 20s and early 30s can buy a starter home, and it be not this out of the box dream. It could actually be a reality. And to cut delay and unnecessary costs. Like, a lot of these costs are unnecessary, and there's a lot of delays in this. And it actually keeps basic protections. So it's structural safety, fraud, pollution, fire risk, property rights, and infrastructure. It keeps all of that. It just cuts out all of the bureaucratic red tape with it that holds up a lot. And it lets families save and purchase, like how it was originally designed. Government stepping back from land use restrictions and prevent private supply from meeting the demand, because private supply can meet the demand if the government were to step back, if there was less bureaucratic in this, and we wouldn't have to rely on government subsidies. We wouldn't have to rely on it because the market would meet the need. So it would be unnecessary for things like housing bonds to even occur, or rent control. And affordable housing would be something you read about in the history books. But again, I'm speculating, and this is allegedly, a lot of the reasons that affordable housing becomes a thing or rent control becomes a thing is because it lends to the narrative that the only one can help you out in a financial crisis, such as inflation, higher interest rates, etc. The only one that can help you out is the government. And unfortunately, it's such a false narrative that's been attached and attached and attached. And that when a problem is created by somebody and they have the solution for that problem, you're going to go to the person who supposedly has a solution. When really, the problem was created by that person. And if that person were to just cut the source of what created that problem, the problem wouldn't occur in the first place. So what I'm saying is cut down the bureaucracy, let the market do its job. And that's all I have on affordable housing. This has been Fault Lines California. Don't forget to check out my other episodes on my opinions on some other topics that I have expressed, but this is affordable housing. So if you come at me and say affordable housing works, I'm going to say, how much are you paying in taxes? And do you like your quality of living right now? And if the answers are no and too much, then you have completely missed the ball on what it is to subsidize affordable housing. All right, I'm Vanessa. Catch you next time. Bye.